morning. It's Wednesday, December 24th, 2014. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. Coming up later today, fearing Islamic militancy, France orders troop reinforcement onto city streets after a string of attacks shake the European country. A treaty laying down international rules for the $85 billion global arms trade goes into effect today, with campaigners vowing to make sure it is strictly implemented. And later on the show, yes, it is Christmas. We take a closer look at the Christians across the Middle East. Good morning, I'm Yael Avi. We begin in Europe this morning, where concerns of Islamic militancy prompted France to order troop reinforcements onto city streets. The Interior Ministry announced yesterday that it was sending military troops to patrol public areas around the country, including shopping, city centers, stations, and public transportation depots, ahead of the Christmas holiday seasons. Now, the decision came after a series of 3 violent attacks in as many as 3 days, which injured 30 people and raised concerns of additional attempts by radical Islamists to carry out attacks in the coming days, amid repeated jihadist calls for lone wolf attacks to avenge the government's military involvement in Iraq. French authorities maintained that the 3 incidents were unrelated and that only the last attack, in which a man drove a van into a market in the city of Nantes, has been declared an act of terror. The 2 previous cases were deemed to be acts of unbalanced individuals. In light of the recent developments, we are taking an extended look this morning into the rise of radical Islam in France and elsewhere in Europe, its causes, its manifestations, and its possible ramifications. And to do so, we're joined in studio by the director of the Center for European Studies at the IDC, Herzliya, Dr. Esther Lupatin. Good morning to you. Thank you for being with us. And by the strategic futurist Tzvi Bisk. Tzvi, good morning. I'm glad you're with me. And before we delve into this issue, a very heavy one, let's take a look at a report about the events in Paris and what transpired in France.
There is, as you know, a terrorist threat to France. We, along with the Interior Minister, have been saying it for a long time. It's without doubt the major challenge of our times.
And this challenge is now more threatening than ever after a 3rd random attack in 3 days astonished the country. In the latest attack, a driver plowed into a Christmas market in Nantes Monday, injuring 10 people, one of them fatally, before stabbing himself. This attack came only a day after a similar one in Dijon, while on Saturday, a man slashed 3 police officers with a foot-long knife near the city of Tours. Authorities were quick to stress there were no apparent terrorist motives, but the first 2 assailants reportedly shouted Allahu Akbar, sparking fears of possible copycat actions.
We don't feel safe anywhere anymore. Today it happened here, tomorrow it could be somewhere else.
This series of incidents is shocking and legitimately gives rise to concern from our compatriots. We want to protect and reassure the French and say to them that all the services of the state are mobilized.
The threat of lone jihadists drawing inspiration from Islamic terrorists is a growing danger all across Europe, as intelligence services are battling both to contain the risk posed by their own nationals who travel to fight with IS in Iraq and Syria, and to identify potential copycat assailants. Either way, France's weekend of terror is an alarming wake-up call for Europe. The much talked about hypothetical threat is not so theoretical anymore.
We're also joined from London by our I-24 News correspondent there, Jonathan Sashadati. Jonathan, good morning to you.
Good morning, yeah.
I want to start first, and obviously you're with us for this entire segment. I want to start with you, though, in terms of reactions around Europe to the attacks in France. When it comes to media, when it comes to reactions in the public, is there a finger pointed at, Islam in general in and around Europe?
Certainly there's a great resistance to saying that that's the problem. And just here in the United Kingdom, we actually had an incident recently where a refuse collection lorry ploughed into pedestrians in Glasgow. And there's been a very concerted effort to emphasize that this was not a terror attack. But as yet, the driver has not been named, even though he's believed to be alive. 6 people were killed, including 2 grandparents and their teenage granddaughter. And of course, people can't help but try to draw parallels between that and what's been happening in France. And then, of course, even before that in Jerusalem, with similar sorts of attacks where vehicles plowed into pedestrians. But I must reiterate that as yet, they've been very specific that they don't think that this was somehow connected. Yet many are noting that it is suspicious that the driver has not been mentioned very much at all in much of the reporting. So there is a fear but there's also a fear that goes hand in hand with that about pointing the finger at Islam. Whenever there's some kind of attack that does appear to be motivated by Islamist extremism, whether it's as a one-off so-called lone wolf attack or as something more coordinated, we find here in Britain at least that many politicians come out with those famous words now, this has nothing to do with Islam. Even in the case of Lee Rigby, the British soldier who was stabbed and decapitated on the streets of London in broad daylight. The next day we found David Cameron, Boris Johnson, the London mayor, people like that saying that this was not connected to Islam, and yet the killers had given interviews to pedestrians and passers-by whilst still dripping with blood on their hands, saying that they were doing this in the name of Islam.
Now, Jonathan, first of all, updating us in where it stands right now, staying with us. Dr. Lupatin, I want to turn to you. It is no secret that, Muslims have been, moving into Europe in droves. When it comes, first of all, what is the situation now, and how are they accepted inside Europe? And why are Europeans so afraid? And again, we want to mention that some of the attacks were not connected to extreme Islam.
I think that's very interesting because when you read actually the German newspapers, and especially the comments by the readers, they keep saying that they are fed up actually with the fact that their leaders, Merkel and other actually German leaders keep saying that it's nothing to do with Islam. But in reality, they feel, that most actually terrorist attacks are carried out by people who are associated with Islam.
Right.
And that's something actually that seems to bother many, many Germans. I mean, the fact that, there's a kind of leadership is living in a state of denial. They refuse to admit that there is a problem and to hold a discussion about this, any debate about, how actually we better integrate Muslim into the European society. And at the same time, make sure that they will be committed to our democratic values, that they will be committed to renounce violence and to respect the democratic rules of the games, respect for the rule of law, respect for minorities, respect for human rights. And I think there's a growing fear in Europe.
Muslims in Europe over the course of the last decade, number-wise, when it comes to society?
Number-wise, I think in Europe today, there are approximately 20 million Muslims. France actually has the biggest population of Muslim population. The estimations is about something between 6 to 8 million Muslims. Wow. Germany has roughly 4 or 4.5 Muslims. Well, in Germany, most of them come from Turkey originally, and it's thanks actually to a recruitment agreement that was signed in 1961 between Germany and Turkey. Originally, they thought they're going to come as a Gastarbeiter, guest workers for a short period of time.
I grew up in places around Germany. It's just the Turkish community there is huge.
Yes.
It's huge, right?
Yeah.
So that's when it comes in terms of numbers. But I want to touch again, and this is with you, Tzvi. I want to touch again on what I think there's an agreement here that there seems to be a fear to address militant Islam as what it is in Europe.
I think we have to liberate ourselves from the phobia of being accused of Islamophobia. The war is not on terror. You can't wage war on a tactic. It's like I'm waging war on the blitzkrieg. I'm waging war on the flanking maneuver. The war is against Islamism, to differentiate from Islam.
But is every terror related to, okay.
We could fight a war against Nazism without being called German phobes. I mean, I could love Beethoven and still fight the Nazis.
Okay.
I can still admire the medieval philosophers of Islam and still fight Islamism. Islamism is an ism. It's a totalitarian ideology. The aim is to conquer the world. And we have to call a spade. And we also should not be afraid to inquire whether there is something inherent in Islamic civilization that produced this, just as there was no problem in researching if there was something inherent in German culture that produced Nazism. You have thousands of books about that. Today, everybody's afraid to call a spade a spade. The war is on radical, fanatic Islamism. And
I mean, again, but you would agree with me, Jonathan, actually, this is to you, I'm sure you've heard this in studio, that if one leader in Europe comes out and says something like that, then immediately, I mean, I don't want to say he gets shot, but there is a problem with that type of, an agenda, what's coming out and saying something like that.
Because the Europeans have lost, in my opinion, sort of a civilizational self-confidence. They're so preoccupied with post-colonial guilt that they can't call a spade a spade. Now, that does not mean you tolerate one iota discrimination against law-abiding Muslims. In other words, it's a two-pronged attack. You respect and integrate law-abiding Muslims, and you uncompromisingly fight against radical Islamism. I don't see why that is such a crazy thing to think about.
I'm not saying crazy, but how would you fight radical Islamism? Let's try that, for example. Jonathan, when it comes to the Muslim community in the UK, for example, where you're sitting at, I mean, they're integrated into society, aren't they? Do you feel, though, that, when it comes to the British law, that there are any types of, lenient ways of towards the Muslim community because of fear, as we've suggested here?
There are about 2,700,000 Muslims here in Great Britain, according to census figures. And that's quite a sizable minority in the British society. Most of those people are absolutely, almost certainly law-abiding, perfectly moderate people. However, that's not really where the problem that we're discussing today arises from. And when we look at the reluctance to discuss Islamism, as your other guest there in the studio has boldly put forward, we will find that what the issue actually is that many people in British society, and I think the same is true around Europe, feel that the reluctance to even pin any of these sorts of attacks and this rising extremism to Islamism for fear of offending the vast majority of Muslims who may well be peace-loving people is what's winding those people in the society up. If we just look at what's been going on in Europe, we think about the Brussels Jewish Museum shooting, we think about the France Toulouse shooting of the children in a Jewish school, and we think now about the more than 17,000 people who marched on the German city of Dresden in the last few days, who were protesting against what they called the Islamification of Europe. What we really see is because of this reluctance to deal with Islamism and extremist Islam on the part of most mainstream politicians, members of the public who are concerned about it are sent into the arms of the far right, making sure that fascist movements, which are taking to the streets in those large numbers in Germany and elsewhere, are actually enjoying some sort of increase in support, which is just as worrying for peace-loving citizens of all religions.
No, and rightfully put, Jonathan, because that's exactly where, I think one of the problems lies with saying that it's the rise of the far right in Europe. And I want to touch on that a little bit, because France's far-right National Front has accused François Hollande socialist government of trying to play down the Islamist threat and stepped up calls for deportation of radical preachers and a tightening of border controls. More than 1,000 French citizens are thought to be involved in jihad on its home soils or in Syria and Iraq. But fears of Islamic radicalization in Europe, as Jonathan mentioned, are not exclusive to France. In Germany, more than 17,000 people took to the streets of Dresden on Monday, protesting against the Islamification of Europe. Let's take a closer look at what happened there and break it down after that.
Residents and far-right militants came together to protest against plans to open a home for asylum seekers on the site of an abandoned football pitch. Tensions have rocked the area for several months, a fact that has saddened some residents.
We are not happy about people turning against foreigners. We think that foreigners are welcome here and that we should take care of them.
Marzahn-Hellersdorf, a large satellite district of Berlin, with nearly 300,000 inhabitants and endless blocks of flats. 1 in 5 is on the dole, and every other family is led by a single parent. In this fragile social context, the unknown is frightening.
Für unsere Menschen ist es über lange Jahre ihres Wohnens im Bezirk
Marzahn-Hellersdorf. It was basically possible to live in Marzahn-Hellersdorf as though people of foreign origin didn't exist. For many people in the district, meeting a person from a different ethnic background who may have another religion is a new experience.
Einen ethnischen Hintergrund hat, der vielleicht eine andere Religion hat, zu treffen, eine ganz neue Erfahrung ist.
Confronted with this new experience, the residents decided to demonstrate every week against the opening of a home for refugees. Presented as a grassroots uprising, the marches are in fact orchestrated by the far right. A small party with close links to extremists pro-Deutschland has called for more education and less immigration. In short, German money for Germans and not foreigners.
Da sagt Otto Normalverbraucher natürlich, wie kann es sein,
average people ask, how is it possible that you have money for the refugees and don't have money to repair streets and pavements? Officials in the district need to give us an answer.
It is this kind of sentiment that is gaining followers in Marzahn-Hellersdorf. At a local association's Christmas party, everyone has a different take on the issue.
They want a lot of money, and some of them have a higher standard of living than we do, the pensioners. I don't like that. They don't pay for public transportation and barely pay any rent.
People are a little more skeptical and reserved because they don't know what to expect. But otherwise, it's just like it's always been here.
As the top destination for refugees in Europe, Germany has taken in some 200,000 people from the world's crisis regions this year. The protests against Islamization and asylum seekers spread across the country in December to cities such as Bonn and Düsseldorf, just as they have grown here in Dresden. This sudden outpouring of anger and resentment has rattled officials at the top levels of the German government. Chancellor Angela Merkel last week warned that there was no place in Germany for hatred of foreigners.
Dr. Lopatin, I want to ask you this, and we'll get to everybody, and I promise. When we look at this in Germany, and I know, the Islamification, that's the fear, supposedly, of the Europeans. But when we look at something like that in Germany, and I don't want to say just Germans, it's no secret that Europe has a history of not liking minorities. Okay? And that's the fear. The understatement of the year, not liking minorities. Exactly. So if you look at that, and there is a real danger, though, that if there is, the Islamification on one hand, but the disdain from minorities can actually lead to horrific things that happen in Europe. I'm not theorizing on that, but the rise of racism and the rise of the far right. Isn't that why leaders should be actually very mindful of connecting all kinds of attacks, as we've seen in France, to a larger ism, as you've said, Svi, that then can lead to racism? Well, let's start with you.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I absolutely agree with you. It looks very bad. Especially when you see, right-wing extremists and neo-Nazis that take part of, distancing.
And 17,000 of them marching
Absolutely.
in the streets.
But at the same time, I do not think that it's only like a neo-Nazi movement, because if you look at the comments made by the people and the supporters of this movement, I think this large support comes actually from other mainstream Germans that typically would actually vote for Merkel or other mainstream parties in Germany, even the SPD. So basically, we're not talking about neo-Nazis only. By the way, one of the biggest complaints of, the supporters is that they think that the media tend always to interview those, neo-Nazi supporters. But I think that in general, we are talking about a wider phenomena, other Germans actually support this movement. And we're talking about people who are really concerned. That's at least what they argue. They're concerned about the future of Germany. And they think that eventually, in light of what's happening, the new security threat, for many years, the discussion in Germany was about, whether actually a Muslim immigrant can actually assimilate into the German society. Right. But now the discourse is whether actually they, that they constitute a threat from their perspective to their personal security because of the growing. And just one thing to mention is I think one of the things that really shocked the Germans is that 2 or 3 months ago, in a small city in Germany, Wuppertal, there were few actually young Muslims that were walking around with vests which says Sharia police. And they were trying to prevent young people actually to go and buy alcoholic beverages and go to bars and discotheques. And the Germans were really shocked.
People, all Germans or just Muslim Germans?
Not just Muslims, but also young Germans, even Christians, and that's something that really shocked the Germans. The fear is that, there is too much politically correctness and we're trying to accommodate, but we don't seem to have any commitment from their side. It's one side street. We're doing too much, but on the other hand, we don't get anything in return.
And I think it's a valid point. The fear, though, and Svi, I know that you're chomping the bigs to say that. I think the fear, because what you described just now, Esther, and valid points, sounded also like arguments in Germany. And again, I have to go back to the 30s of the last century. They sound like arguments of, genuine concern of local national citizens about the fact that our way of life is being, challenged, et cetera, et cetera. Isn't there a danger in Europe that if fingers are pointed straight at just a specific religion, that can lead to something else?
Look, you have to make a differentiation. If you don't make the differentiation between Islamism and law-abiding Muslims, you're going to have this right-wing reaction. And David Cameron on August 29th, said it's a war against poisonous Islamist extremism. He's the first one that came out and said what it is. Now, you can't compare it to the 30s. You can't say the German Jews were not assimilated into Germany and into German culture.
That I will agree with.
And what the European countries have to do is reestablish a certain sense of self-esteem and self-confidence, and reestablish their own constitutionalist principles. In France, there are over 750 no-go zones where the police don't go. There are dozens of no-go zones in England where they want to have Sharia police. In Norway, in Sweden, and everybody's afraid of reestablish your constitutionalist principles. And you can do it, by the way, in terms of what I call fighting against gender apartheid. President Eisenhower sent in the troops in 1956 in Little Rock, Arkansas.
I know, but
you have to have some kind of self-confidence in your own principles. The French state has given up the sovereignty of the Republic and the principles of French constitutionalism in 750 areas in France.
Yeah, but when it comes
and it's on a website, by the way. They put it on a website. Don't go there. It's not part of France anymore.
But that said, putting confidence in your national values and then looking at, and Jonathan, actually, I want to touch on that with you. Looking at what's going on in Europe right now, I'm sure the fear also of all these countries, as mentioned, in the lead up to their reports, is ISIS and the threat, and that actually, the extreme Islamists are coming into Europe to wreak havoc there. But that said, we're looking at huge waves of Europeans who are actually making the switch themselves, not born into the Muslim faith, and moving over to war zones. I'm talking about ISIS recruiting people in Europe. What would you say is actually the attraction to that mode? Because we're seeing it all over Europe. And in many ways, that raises the question in my mind, maybe something is wrong with the administrations in European countries that, not only allowing it and being PC, but that young people are looking to steer away from the European way of life and moving into extremism themselves, if they weren't born into it even.
In that respect, we've got to remember that despite the terrifyingly large numbers of people who might be going to fight in Syria and Iraq with ISIS, the actual true percentage of Europeans and the European population who are doing that is incredibly small. Right. And so we're not really looking at a mass movement. But what I think is key is what we're discussing now, and we've really got to the crux of the matter in this discussion, which is assimilation into Europe, assimilation into the values of Europe and the values that European countries stand up for is what is key. And what's missing in a lot of the debate, even at political level here and across Europe, is a discussion of what kind of immigrants might be desirable for Europe and specific states within Europe, and what kind might not be. Theresa May here in the UK has just issued a suggestion that after students from outside Europe have finished their education here at university level, they should have their visas removed and they should have to leave the country in order to reapply for visas if they want to come here and work. And this has been given a very mixed reception because to many people it doesn't seem logical that, for example, highly educated and hardworking Chinese students who've achieved degree or postgraduate level qualifications here in Britain should then be shipped out because there is a sort of aversion to some kinds of immigration here. Of course, it's really difficult to discuss this, as we're discovering this morning, without there being accusations of racism. And I think that it's worth just pointing out as well that it's not just people on the street, it's not just the 17,000 marching in Germany, it's not just neo-Nazis, and it's not just the extreme right who are concerned about this, but people are finding they don't have an outlet to explain their concerns. The director of television at the BBC, a man called Danny Cohen, so you can guess what his religion is, has expressed just in the last couple of days, and this is a man who doesn't really talk about anti-Semitism or his Judaism very much on the public stage, has just expressed that having lived all his life in the UK, this is a quote, "I've never felt as I do now about anti-Semitism in Europe. You've seen the number of attacks rise, you've seen murders in France, you've seen murders in Belgium. It's pretty grim, actually. And it's made me think," he said, about is our long-term home actually here in Europe? Because he feels that maybe Jews do not have a place in Britain and in Europe in the future. And he spoke in that interview, which he actually gave in Jerusalem, about the possibility of him and his wife moving to America in the future. So we've really got to sit up and listen when prominent figures like him at the top of their career, a man earning over $327,000
No, Jonathan, I agree, but my
a year,
fear with that is the connection between anti-Semitism and radical Islam is really, really dangerous. And I think you would agree with me on that. Hold on. Esther, Dr. Lupatin wants to go ahead.
Well, I think like if you look at the recent attacks, most of them were carried by Muslims, not by Christians in Europe. I mean, and if anything is happening, like when we saw it at the recent election for the European Parliament, the Euro-skeptic parties and also even the far-right extremists, like in Strache in Austria or Le Pen even, or like Wilders in Netherlands, all of them are actually expressing very much pro-Israeli views. Wilders actually said, our actually commitment is actually to defend the Jews of Europe, and Strache said the same thing in Austria. So it's really interesting. In Eastern Europe, of course, there is a real problem, like in Hungary and other parts of Europe. But in Western Europe, it's really interesting phenomena. Like far-right extremists that in the past, 10 years ago, were anti-Semitic now.
Right.
They're becoming actually pro-Israelis, and they say that their actually role is to defend the Jews of Europe, which is really interesting phenomena.
Maybe the anti-Islamization movement is actually is causing a pro-Israel approach, but I'm sure Jonathan will nod his head and disagree. That said, Zvi, do you think? I mean, I don't think that the administrations in Europe are going to, come straight out front and and do what you say is and refer to it as you want them to refer to it. But what do you think can happen in the future if this continues?
Well, I think there are four areas you have to attack, and I think the solution to the problem is grand strategic, not tactical.
Not tactical.
And it's long term, like the Cold War. Like you fought the Cold War with the Marshall Plan, you fought the Cold War with NATO, and it took 50 or 60. We're talking about a generational problem here. So you've got four areas you have to attack. Number one is dependence on Middle East petroleum. In the last 20 or 30 years, Qatar and Saudi Arabia have contributed over $100 billion to Wahhabi, to the most, it's like 90% of the mosques built in the last 20 years in the world have been financed by Wahhabi money. It's like saying in Christianity, 90% of the churches have been financed by the Ku Klux Klan or something similar to that. We're talking about something, so that's a long-term
It's a long-term problem. I mean, sadly, I can ask you so many questions right now on that, and Jonathan, I'm sure, I know, but we've got about 20 seconds left, and this is a discussion that could really continue, and we will continue later on our shows, I'm sure, throughout the coming weeks. Thank you so much for being with me this morning, Zvi, and same to you, Esther. Jonathan, of course, always a pleasure with you. When we get back, an international treaty seeking to regulate the weapons trade goes into force. We'll take a closer look. First, though, let's hear some more of the morning headlines. Good morning. I-24 News Morning Edition, December 24th, which is Christmas Eve. Ruthie?
Yes. Christmas Eve, I agree completely.
You agree completely?
Yes.
It is Christmas Eve. It is the day, it's the time of the show, actually, where Ruthie Sinai, senior I-24 news editor, joined us because I do believe that Anthony Grant today is on assignment in the North Pole. Lapland is a good one, is a good one. He sent us these.
Oh, how
yeah,
nice.
I know, cute. But I'm scaring the other guests in the studio. That said, Ruthie is here for us to scan the news you missed to give you the news you missed while scanning the headlines, and we're going to start.
Right. Okay, so have you heard there's going to be elections in Israel?
Really?
Yeah. Mid-March. And yet another poll published.
It's a new poll this morning, right?
It's a new poll as of last night, and it's, it's pretty much, there's polls coming out pretty much every day now, and it's going to be our lot in life for the next 3 months. Anyway, so this poll is fairly consistent with the previous findings, which it essentially says that Labour and Likud are still neck and neck.
Neck and neck, but it takes one mandate. I can see him off of Likud. It's kind of the same thing.
It's going to change, a million times. What I found more interesting, actually, about this Channel 10 poll last night was the fact that while 38% still want say they want Netanyahu as prime minister, 32% are willing to go for Herzog, the Labour Party leader, which is a fairly small gap, 38 to 32%, and very unheard of until quite recently.
When it comes to Herzog.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
No.
I mean, For Netanyahu, it's not brilliant, 38%, but for Herzog, it's fairly...
It's going up. I mean, we cannot really connect it, and I'm just theorizing with you out loud, to the unification, quote unquote, with Livni?
We can.
We can.
The Herzog, of course.
Yeah.
I have no doubt about it. That,
not because he seems to be the only game in town when it comes to, and that too being one of the agendas, I think, of the rising support, the only game in town.
Right. But
as
you know, this conventional wisdom all these years that there's no alternative to Netanyahu. So now the thinking is, and this is how it's being built, is yes, there is an alternative. It's called Livni Herzog, or Herzog Livni.
But as you mentioned, these things will change, obviously, many more times. Till March 17th.
82 days, I believe. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to another part of the world. Yes, we have a story on The Guardian. It's been everywhere. Sony has, uncapitulated.
Mm-hmm.
They will screen the movie, this incredibly, I don't know what to call it.
Satire,
literary quality movie. Mm-hmm. They will screen it after all, limited edition. It'll be available on VOD and some movie theaters. And Seth Rogen, who is the co-producer and is a very funny guy, said, freedom has prevailed. You know, Sony didn't give up after all. And
a really quick poll in the studio, really quick poll. We have guests coming up for the next item, and Amir Oren with us as well. How ridiculous is this story?
As ridiculous as was the Sacha Baron Cohen story with Kazakhstan in Borat. And Kazakhstan...
I agree, but this has the CIA and the FBI, and two nuclear states and Hollywood involved.
And Angelina Jolie.
Right. And Angelina Jolie, exactly. And the only thing I want to say before you continue is this movie better be good.
It's not. I can tell you ahead. It's not.
Okay.
This is going to be the next punishment in North Korea. Go see this movie.
That's exactly right. You have to watch the movie.
It's bingo. That's going to be the torture. Yes. Okay. And moving on.
All right. The Telegraph tells us that Ukraine, the parliament yesterday, voted to lift Ukraine's status as a non-aligned country, meaning they're no longer Switzerland, which basically opens the way to supposedly to NATO membership. I think it's a ways away. But this is basically sort of a Russian nightmare of sorts. Not nightmare, I'm exaggerating, but this is exactly what Putin wanted to avoid.
To stop in many ways.
As he did, this whole thing erupted, as we remember, because the Ukraine wanted to join or sign the European...
But you know, when is NATO going to vote on having Ukraine join it?
When?
The day after the European Union votes to have Turkey join it.
Yeah.
NATO is not going to wage war against Russia.
I agree with you. And if you remember, Ukraine wanted to join NATO early on in the post-Soviet era, and they were rejected.
In the same way.
They're not. Yeah.
So Russia can condemn it, but everybody knows this is so to speak, just a show of arms. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Nicaragua. We're going on to Central America. Nicaragua wants a Panama Canal. So they started.
As they should.
They started. There was a launch ceremony yesterday in Managua, which is about 120 kilometers from where this place actually is. But anyway, this is a canal that's supposed to link the Atlantic and the Pacific, much the same as Panama's famous one. It's longer than Panama's. There's a lot of controversy, huh?
50 billion. Looking at how much it's going to cost.
Exactly.
Yes.
There's a lot of controversy around it, both for environmental reasons and because of very heavy Chinese investment in there, and there's some people who are saying it's going to be a white elephant and nobody's going to use it, and
they're going ahead with it.
Yeah, they're going ahead. It's supposed to be ready in 2020.
Are there also white camels? Because we can have the Mad Red Dead canal built.
Genius.
When they build
theirs.
I gotta say, I'm sensing a lot of chemistry here. Like, seriously, I'm loving it. Yes.
Chemical weapons. Okay.
Chemical weapons.
All right. Erdogan, always good for a headline.
We can't have a morning without Erdogan.
Absolutely. Yes. So, New York Times. He says anybody who uses birth control is a traitor, basically.
Wait.
Hold
on.
Thinks,
I think only the women have to address this.
Okay. What was it he said the other day also about women, that they're basically inferior?
They were inferior and using birth control. Inferior. Well, clearly, we need to be, barefoot, naked in the kitchen and bearing a child.
But it's good that you said it, because the stereotype
Watch
is that
it.
Yes, I know.
Watch
is
it.
that there is a certain Turkish method of birth control, and obviously this is not true.
Huh?
What is that birth
control
method?
I don't think it's for
Midnight. We've talked about movies, Midnight Express,
okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, basically, Erdogan thinks that the Turkish people should be having a lot more babies and to have more.
And women need to speak less.
Yes, absolutely.
Nice.
Seen and not heard. Okay, our last item.
Yes.
The Daily Mail tells us about a furor caused by Naomi Campbell, who, for those of us who remember, used to be the presenter and spokeswoman for PETA, for people for the ethical treatment of animals. She got a Christmas gift from a very famous designer, Riccardo Tisci, I think is the way you pronounce it, and it's a fur coat.
It's a fur.
And
I was about to say that looks like a little puppy, but no, it might have been a puppy.
And next to it is a snakeskin bag, if you can see there.
Please.
So ethical
Schmieder.
Treatment of animals, as long as she can wear them. Basically.
Bingo. Yes. Do never trust a supermodel, said the short woman, Ruthie Sinai. Thank you. As we move along. The landmark arms trade treaty, regulating the international trade in conventional arms, from small arms to battle tanks, combat aircrafts and warships, goes into effect today. The United States, by far the world's largest arms producer and exporter, has signed the treaty but has yet to ratify it. Other key exporters, such as France, Britain, and Germany, have ratified the charter and pledged to adhere to its strict criteria, aiming at putting off weapons supplies to human rights violators worldwide. Israel, also a major player in the weapons business, joined the pact last week, but also has yet to ratify it. To further discuss this, we're joined in studio by Communications Manager in Amnesty International in Israel, Roni Margalit. Roni, good morning to you. And of course, by one and only Haaretz Senior Defense Correspondent, Amir Oren. Amir, good morning to you.
Morning, Yael.
Ruthie's still with us. Let's watch a short clip by Amnesty that makes the case for all countries to commit to the treaty that I believe many will sign, but will be very hard to ratify. Let's take a look.
Every year, around $100 billion worth of weapons are traded around the world. 12 billion bullets are produced annually. 875 million small arms and light weapons are in circulation worldwide. 15,730 battle tanks, 1,904 attack helicopters, 8,930 18,175 armored vessels, 219 large caliber artillery systems. These weapons flow around the world and often end up in the wrong hands. Amnesty International and others recognized this issue 20 years ago. We've been campaigning for a global treaty to ban the sale of arms to human rights abusers. Today, the Arms Trade Treaty has officially become international law. It's a huge victory for everyone who has fought to end the reckless trade in arms. But the real work starts now, to make sure the treaty is strictly implemented. You can help. Make sure your government bites the bullet and both accepts and upholds the treaty, and put pressure on the world's biggest arms exporters to join with others to endorse it too.
Roni, I want to start with you. From Amnesty International in Israel, how hard was it to push this charter through?
Very hard.
Okay.
First, I want to say it's a huge achievement for activists all around the world and for Amnesty International that lobbied and campaigned for this. 2 decades ago, this treaty wasn't. There were even people that mocked the idea to regulate arms trade around the world, and today it becomes an international law. Its significance is amazing, and there is, of course, the signing and ratifying. And there's a huge difference between the two of them. Not only USA, only Israel have signed the treaty last week, but signing doesn't mean that you make the international law into your own government law. It still have to be ratified, and the next step must be ratify this international law and to go to the Knesset and to do all the procedure.
All the procedures that need to be done.
Yes.
I'm going to touch with you on this in a second. I want to ask Emil Owen, because you know Emil Owen and myself are seasoned, me much more so, seasoned sarcastic people. Israel signing it, I'm assuming, as a show of well, first of all, let's start with this. Israel is an arms dealer. What can you tell me about that?
Well, you watched the clip, and obviously Charlton Heston could have made the opposite clip, saying for the Rifle Association, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And Daesh only needs knives to behead people in order to terrorize the population. Israel is an arms dealer both as a government-to-government supplier and as the regulator of licenses given to the industry. Right. And on both strategic and commercial considerations, it doesn't want to limit itself in its exports. Among other things, because while this treaty registers and monitors the arms trade to governments and to groups, Israel may find itself in need of supplying, let's say, an anti-government group in Iran, which is outside the scope of the treaty, and could be considered a terrorist group, such as the Mujahideen al-Khalq. This is just in theory. But Israel wants to have as complete room for maneuver as possible, and doesn't want to ally itself with the good guys, quote unquote, of the international club. It doesn't want to be perceived as one of the bad guys either, such as Iran and Syria, supplying Hezbollah, or Russia and China, who are neutral in this debate. Now, the United States, which Ronnie mentioned earlier, was against this treaty altogether under George W. Bush. It changed its position when
under
Barack
Obama, but it's a very interesting point that you're making, because Ronnie, I want to ask you, I mean, at the end of the day, and correct me if I'm wrong, signing it, as we've mentioned several times in this discussion, is not ratifying it. So, I mean, arms deals in the United States is something also that creates and generates a lot of revenue. This is amnesty, or people who are for this charter believe that the United States itself is ever going to ratify this.
This is the problem with signing before it comes into force. If they were signing the treaty after it came to force, there would be no other choice but to sign it and ratify it at the same time. But if you sign it before, then we can suspect that maybe they are not willing to
they're not willing to ratify it.
But you need 50 signatories or 60. You need 60 signatories for the treaty to come into force. And while there were only 50, Israel hesitated. And only when it saw that it was going to come into force, it sneaked in a few days before the deadline. But in the United States, the position is awkward. First of all, they don't want to ban any import of weapons because of the right of the people to bear arms, constitutionally protected.
Yes.
Then export. So in any event, what you have here is the international order of the United Nations post-World War II, now being questioned by many groups, Daesh, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others.
And this is the significance of making this international
and by the way,
law.
criminal gangs and narcotics, this is also very important to avoid spillage.
Amnesty International have documented many unregulated, for example, Russia shift of South Sudan conflict, or even to Honduras, that is first place in the world in homicide. Because
and a valid point. That said, you know, as we mentioned here, the ratification is going to be, I think, the crux of it to see how this develops. Emil Owen, always such a pleasure to have you make sense of things. Zoni from Amnesty International, thank you for being with us. When we get back, it is Christmas. It's still Christmas. It's when it begins. We'll take a closer look at Christians in the Middle East. First, though, let's hear some more of the morning headlines. So, yeah. Welcome back. It is still Wednesday, December 24th, 2014, because it's Christmas. I can't believe I had to look at Tal Heinrich for that. This is still the morning edition. I am still Yael Levi, and thank you for staying with us. It is Christmas, and Pope Francis sent a Christmas letter of solidarity yesterday to the Christians of the Middle East, describing them as victims of a newer and disturbing terrorist organization of previously unimaginable dimensions, which has perpetrated all kinds of abuses and human acts, and that is a quote from the letter of the pontiff. Though he did not name ISIS, the reference to the rise of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria was clear. The Pope wrote that Christians in the area have been brutally driven out of their native lands, where they have been present since apostolic times. Now, because it's Christmas Eve today, and the holiest days for those of Christian persuasion and celebrated around the world, but as the Holy Father mentioned yesterday, the Christians of this region have seen better days. Their communities dwindled in the last decades, but in the war-torn areas of Iraq and Syria, they are dangerously persecuted. We are going to discuss Christmas in many happy ways very shortly, but we are first joined from Jerusalem itself by I-24 News. Matthias. We are joined by I-24 News.
Hi,
good morning to you. Matthias is with us at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I want to touch with you a little bit because we have been discussing the persecution of Christians in the Middle East over the course of the last several years, but also specifically now. As you're standing there, are there more people this time of year, do you think, near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? And what are the Christians of the Middle East facing this time of year?
Actually, you have to talk to people, Christians here in this neighborhood. I'm standing here in new gates of Jerusalem, in front of the Notre Dame Center, one of the main places of Christians in the old city of Jerusalem. And you can understand how they feel, how they're reacting about the place of Christians in the Middle East. I've talked to them and I said, what can I do here? I'm not Jewish, I'm not Muslim, they are making war one to another. And I'm in the middle. I'm not Israeli, I'm not Palestinian. How can I do here? We escaped completely Bethlehem. That less and less Christians all over the last years in Bethlehem. There's an increase of 1 or 2% this year of tourism, Christian tourism in Bethlehem. And you can see also one of the high responsible, Notre Dame Center, talked to me and said all the Christians in the Middle East are in a tough situation because of ISIS, Yazidis in Iraq, Christians in Syria. You can remember a couple of months ago the village of Ma'amullah, where there were a tough fight between Christians and Assad fighter against ISIS ones. So you can understand the situation in worse and worse during the last years.
No, definitely. And Matthias Simba with us in Jerusalem, standing there. Though this morning, where you're standing, what is the ambiance in Jerusalem this morning?
Actually, you can see behind me one of the shops open very early in the morning and trying to sell Christmas trees and a lot of gifts for children. You can see, for example, the Christmas tree. I can ask my cameraman David to film this Christmas tree in the heart of the old city of Jerusalem. And what we can say actually that you can see people behind me, but in a couple of hours, around 11 or 12 a.m., there will be no one here. All the people will come to Bethlehem. You can say that, Bethlehem is far from here, about 10 kilometers, so it's very close. And they're going to spend all day long in Bethlehem. Will be a huge prayer around midnight tonight. Right. And to be not politically correct, Yael, when I ask people what they're going to do tomorrow for the day of Christmas, they answered me that we're not going to celebrate the party, but trying to download the film, the controversial film, The Interview in United States.
Okay, Matthias Simbar joining us from Jerusalem. Thank you very much. We'll touch base with you also throughout the day, this Christmas day in the Holy Land. Speaking of Bethlehem, we're joined in studio by Franciscan custody of the Holy Land, Father Angelo Eisen. Ison, I'm pronouncing your name right. Good morning to you, Father Ison. An honor to have you with us. And also by Middle East and Africa correspondent, Global Sisters Report, Melanie Lindman. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
And we'll touch a bit about Christian tourism in the Holy Land. But speaking of Bethlehem, that Matthias Sinbar mentioned, for many years, you, Father Ison, you were actually the master of ceremony when it comes to
No, not really. I'm just the one in charge of the diplomatic corps.
Okay.
So one of them, on the side of the Palestinian Authority, President Abbas, and the 4 consul generals of Italy, France, Spain, and Belgium. They had the privileges for many, many years. You know, they're the ones who can sit they're the only ones who are allowed to sit with their families and the ministers at the Basilica of the Nativity, on December 24, midnight mass.
And the midnight mass, December 24th, today is the mass, right?
Yes.
It's the most important mass.
The most important mass with the patriarch.
Now, I'm asking, questions that only a Jew would ask, but it's essentially
yes, the most important.
The most important mass, and in Bethlehem, I think I remember covering Bethlehem for many years, the midnight mass. People, don't understand how, if you're a Christian around the world, you can spend years working to save money to get to Bethlehem right at this time of year.
That's true.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, when it comes to these Christian, when it comes to the Christian tourism, numbers of Christian tourism in the Holy Land this year, on the rise or on the fall?
Well, tourism overall in Israel fell between 1% and 7% this year because of the situation, the war this summer in Gaza. Last year, there were 3.5 million tourists that came to Israel, and 60% of those tourists were Christian. So Christian tourism is a huge financial aspect for Israel. But I think that the country is really losing an opportunity on Christmas. The tourism ministry said there's about 70,000 Christian tourists who are coming specifically for Christmas. Matthias mentioned that if you walk around the old city tonight, Christmas Eve, it's completely shuttered. There's nobody there. There's really very few opportunities for tourists to experience Christmas in Jerusalem. You can go to Bethlehem. I've been to Bethlehem. I haven't covered it, but I've been kind of as a tourist, and I didn't know that you need to get tickets to attend the Mass. So I just spent hours.
Father, I said, yes, you do.
Yes, so that was news to me as a tourist. And
it's okay. In the United States, it was news to me that you need to buy a ticket to a synagogue if you're a Jew.
That's also
but
true.
There's that. Okay.
But you just spend hours and hours waiting outside, and there's very few opportunities, and there's very few infrastructure to celebrate, to help tourists celebrate Christmas in Israel and the Palestinian territories.
The Palestinian territories, and I'm assuming you would agree, Father Ison, that it should be actually more open. Is it hard to get Christian community to Bethlehem? At the end of the day, there is access. You and I discussed this, but we can't forget that Bethlehem is also covered by a wall. It's surrounded by a wall. Is there any kind of attempts also by the Vatican or by the Christian community to try and ease and make sure that especially as Melanie says, it's kind of a lost opportunity also for tourism, right?
Yes.
Are there attempts to try and make that situation easier that the church is trying to push?
Yes.
How so?
Well, we asked. I bring when I was the chaplain of the Philippine chaplaincy for many years. I always asked the authorities, Israeli authorities, and the governor of Bethlehem, who's Jewish, and and the government to allow the pilgrims to Bethlehem on December 25, for one day, just to get through. And we were successful.
You successful. Christmas Day, December 25th.
Christmas Day, and they don't ask for visas or anything. Just as long as you're not an Israeli, because it was forbidden before, during those times. But now you can still go, and they allow it,
Which is a hopeful
thing. You just have to ask the permission, or you give them the advance notice that there's going to be 25 buses passing through the checkpoint, and they're very helpful, So perfect.
This year, the tourism ministry is actually organizing free shuttles from downtown Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and they have kind of an interesting initiative where anyone passing through the checkpoint at Rachel's tomb is going to get a Ministry of Tourism Christmas goodie bag.
Yes, it was very nice. It was a surprise,
So,
do we know what's in that goodie bag?
I don't know what's in that goodie bag.
Chocolates.
I believe that's
chocolate. Aha!
Good chocolate.
We have Yom Kippur. When we can't
listen. I think hands down, Christmas, also much better holiday than Hanukkah. Nothing against, any type of religion. But look at this. This is so pretty. Yeah, and we get oil in a donut. But yes, so we know that it's chocolate. Everybody's staying in studio as we are moving to Tal Heinrich with the Spiral Violet. That's a web review. But I want to, take a look. Let's start with what you have, because you're promoting your own show, which is Focus, that deals with Christmas.
So you want to start with Focus?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with it.
Let's start with Focus.
So this week we decided to bring the show out of the studio due to Christmas and bring the lovely atmosphere from Nazareth, the childhood home of Jesus, and where he spent his first 13 years.
We have 13 years?
13 years.
Yes.
You see? I've done my homework.
Yes, you did.
So our first interview was the real Santa Claus, actually. Yes, I got the opportunity to speak to him.
You sat with Santa?
He lives in Lapland.
Good.
And in Santa Claus Village, and they're actually very busy on every other day of the year, not only during Christmas time. And I asked Santa, what would be your request for a gift if you could ask for one thing for yourself? And let's see what he replied.
What did Santa have to say?
If I could ask one thing that would make me happy forever, is that all the children could have the right and the possibility to learn to read.
Wait, what does Santa want? Every child needs to read.
To read and to learn how to write and read.
Amen to that.
That's a lovely wish.
Although I have to say, and once again, I'm glad that we have an expert here, that I'm sure that if you asked every child around the world what they want for Christmas, it wouldn't be a book these days, would it?
No.
No. Yes!
No, not bike, not book.
Apparently, most of the people in Jerusalem want the interview for Christmas.
No, maybe that's in the goodie bag of the tourism ministry. Yes.
So our second pit stop on Focus this week was the Basilica of the Annunciation, also a church in Nazareth, which was built at the place where, according to the Roman Catholic tradition, Angel Gabriel announced to the Virgin Mary that she would conceive and become the mother of Jesus, the Son of God.
Is she right?
That's true, yes.
Yes, a good explanation.
And
I can explain about Moses and better, but
long holiday.
Yeah. Yes, but and then there we met with Father Bruno, who is the head of this church, and we talked to him also about the persecution of Christians all over the Middle East. But I asked him actually about Pope Francis. How can he explain the fact that this Pope infused so many new energies into the Catholic Church, and also maybe acquired a status of a worldwide celebrity, not only for Christian believers.
No.
So let's see.
Let's see what Father Bruno of the Church of the Annunciation had to say.
Pope Francis is charismatic. He's charismatic not only within the Church. Pope Francis is charismatic for the whole world. Paternally, with love, he appeals to all humanity. He breaks down barriers. Pope Francis does not like the security measures, since he wants to meet the people. And this means Pope Francis is greatly supported among people.
When Father Eisen, you know Father Bruno, I'm assuming, of course.
He's a guardian of we call them guardian.
Guardians. Okay.
Guardian of the Basilica and Monastery of the Annunciation. A Brazilian, very fine Brazilian priest.
No, very fine Brazilian. And I think what Tal Heinrich said about Pope Francis, we can definitely say that he has achieved already in the short time that he's been Pope, he's achieved the status that, much more so, don't answer that, I know you can't, but much more so than the previous Pope, that his appeal is massive, right? Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think he's so loved by even us, the Jews?
Yes, because he has a good heart, really, and down to earth.
Right. Right.
He brought the church back to the people. Really, he's a great person, and
I think all very valid points. We've covered him many times.
Yeah.
Down to the people, and actually, Christmas is also for the people in many ways. Right.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the Church of the Annunciation, I wanted to take it back to you a little bit, Tal Heinrich. Father Bruno. So you spoke to him about when he said about Nazareth, and Melanie as well. Nazareth itself gets more tourists than Bethlehem throughout this time of year, maybe because it's more accessible. We don't know that.
Bethlehem actually attracts about 86% of all the tourists, Christian tourists. It's the number 2 site after Jerusalem. Jerusalem gets about 90%. I think Nazareth is also up there, about 80%. The vast majority of Christian tourists who come here as pilgrims are here on an 8-day trip, and they'll see both of those places.
Everything, right.
The atmosphere there is just, it's great. For me, it felt like being abroad.
Right, in the Church of the Annunciation.
Yeah. And the entire atmosphere, throughout the city, just beautiful, very beautiful. There's a huge Christmas tree. They had different shows.
No, and places to remind people to be in. That was the Christmas time that we have, sadly. We're almost done. I just want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. I was about to sing something about Christmas, but I will spare you. So that's it for this block, though. Father Eisen, thank you for being with us. Same to you, and Tal, always a pleasure. When we get back, something completely different, sports, but in a Christmas spirit. So stay with us. First, though, the news. Good morning, and thank you for staying with us. I-24 News, December 24th, it's Christmas Day. And it's the time of year where we're joined in studio by Michael Friedman, another fellow Jew who loves Christmas very, very much.
It's not a bad holiday.
It's not a bad holiday, right? And I'd like to give you this.
Oh, thank you.
It's my Christmas present to you.
Perfect.
Right? We're also, and Michal Livon, of course, another Jew, in the studio.
Why'd you give it away?
No, I know. And I'm giving you this.
She get one as well?
There you go,
Thank
in the
you.
hand that is healthy.
Beautiful.
We also have this, guys. I just want to let you know. We have a Christmas tree that's a little sad. I don't know if you can see that at home. It's a sad Christmas tree, but it's going to be happy very soon. I'm going to hold it with my hand like this. Okay, Michael Friedman, you're here for sports.
Yes.
For a Christmassy sporty thing. And I want you to basically tell me what you have for me, and I'll shut up. Yes.
Today we have, first off, FIFA has been an absolute mess. They are...
Damn them.
They never can escape the corruption claims with 2018 and 2022 World Cup, one being in Russia, one going to be in Qatar.
Right.
Scandals and more. Michael Garcia resigned.
The moment they announced the World Cup in Qatar,
everybody was saying there's going to be problems.
Yeah.
So Michael Garcia resigned, and it's led to many controversy. So
okay. We have a report about that. Let's take a look at that controversy on this Christmas Day. There you go. Christmas Day.
Once again, the FIFA Ethics Committee is under scrutiny after Michael Garcia resigned from his post in protest over the handling of his report over the bidding process of the 2018 and 2022 FIFA World Cups. The former federal prosecutor and FIFA has had an interesting relationship from the start, and his involvement ended in an ugly breakup. Garcia ultimately disputed the integrity of the heads of the FIFA organization.
Leadership that makes clear to everyone, this is what we have set up the Ethics Committee to do, this is why they do it, and this is what they have done. It is that kind of leadership that breathes life into a code of ethics.
With the departure of Michael Garcia, questions remain as to how FIFA can truly change after years of scandals and criticism. The dark cloud that overshadows the beautiful game has angered many in the football world, including UEFA President Michel Platini, who has been questioning the credibility of FIFA.
FIFA's Ethics Committee was created to increase transparency at the organization. That's what we wanted, but in the end it has just caused more confusion. Mr. Garcia's resignation is a new failure for FIFA.
This new low has led to others such as Jerome Champagne, who will be challenging Sepp Blatter for presidency in May. He called Michael Garcia's resignation a step backwards for FIFA. While FIFA announced they would release parts of Garcia's findings, they still put themselves in a hole as they appear to be hiding something. The investigation was made to help reveal the willingness of Sepp Blatter's organization and confront some of its deep-rooted problems, but the head of FIFA is being cautious over the information being released.
I managed to put the executive committee behind the recommendation of Mr. Scala. That is to say yes to the publication of Garcia report, but under certain conditions.
But what the world of football wants and needs to see is a level of transparency, a change within one of the world's biggest sports governing bodies that shows what is truly happening in their own organization.
With us in studio, Michael Friedman of the Sports Magazine. That was your report. And when you say, at the end of this report, when basically, I'm theorizing here, but the fact that, the bulk of it is not going to be coming out feels like a bit of a cover-up in many ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. Many are wondering, if they're only going to show parts of it, what's in there that's
so explosive?
Yeah. How is it going to hurt FIFA inside? Unless it's something very damaging, of course.
Yeah.
But the big question is more about Sepp Blatter. He's been there. He's going on. He wants to in May go for his 5th term. He's 79 years old, and people believe that he should go. And what changes can happen with Sepp Blatter there? He is basically invincible. He's making everyone within FIFA wealthier. All of the big guys are doing well, but the people, the fans of football are very upset, and it's not a pretty thing for the football world.
Yeah, for the football world to view that, especially in wake of these upcoming big world events. I'm thinking of Russia and Qatar, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Qatar, they've had so many issues with the migrant workers and people with the buildings. So it's not a sports country whatsoever, and they're trying to fake it until they can make it, apparently.
And it's going all the way, but fake it till they can make it is the right way to put it. But enough sadness. It is Christmas Eve. I said Christmas Day before, but that's just because I'm a Heb. On Christmas Day, on Christmas Eve, though,
we got some jolly sports.
Jolly sports. Let's jolly it up. What is this next report about?
We have different Santas running around, swimming all throughout the world. They're there.
Michal Livon and I are very happy. Do we get any kind of naked Santas as well?
There are unfortunately no naked Santas.
Let's take a look at yeah, sadly. Sadly that. It's not a shame. Okay. Fully dressed Santas running around courts. Let's take a look.
The holiday spirit is being seen all around the world, from Moscow to the Florida Keys to Alaska and as far as Sydney, with Santas spreading the joy to everyone. In the streets of Moscow, around 500 Santas ran for charity, aiming to raise a sack full of money for children's clinics. Although the weather outside was frightful, it didn't prevent the brave runners from participating in the fun runs. Dressed in the iconic red and white Santa Claus costumes, the warm outfits helped the runners from freezing. The organizers of the event hope to give the extra holiday cheer to the children suffering from serious illnesses. All the way down under, over 2,500 people dressed up as Santa Claus and ran through the streets of Sydney. The festive runners raised money for the children's charity in the 5-kilometer run. All of the Santas went through Darling Harbour and finished in front of the Sydney Opera House. After the race, the dancing Santas had smiles on their face as they helped empower children around Australia with disadvantages. Another Santa went for a swim in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary to deliver presents to all the good mermaids and mermen. Jolly old St. Nick's red suit and white beard flowed throughout the water as he swam by the various schools of fish. He even brought with him a Christmas tree for the sea creatures to enjoy. The annual Keys tradition is another fundraising opportunity for the local children. But others went to more extreme measures as they jumped into a freezing lake in Alaska at the annual Polar Plunge fundraiser. Many were in the Christmas spirit, some dressed up as elves, while others wore their red shirts and Santa hats. The participants stayed in the icy water for only a few seconds before they rushed ashore. However, the event was truly special as they raised around $347,000 in support of the Special Olympics Alaska athletes statewide. With Christmas being felt around the world, once again, sports has shown to be the true miracle for giving.
Very, very cool holiday, I have to say. But what is the thing that unites all these Santa sporty occasions around the world?
Sports, athletics, it's...
Santa, I have to say something, Khalifan will agree with me. When you look at Santa throughout the years, the image of Santa, the stereotypical Santa, does not look like a very sporty guy.
No.
Right?
And some of those Santas were...
He does look like a football fan.
Yes.
Right?
He could be a linebacker.
He could be a linebacker.
But he's probably sitting back watching
the game.
With
a beer. Yeah. Okay. So, but all of these are for charity, right?
Yeah, so it was really nice. All these people, whether they were swimming or running, all around the world are doing something for charity, raising money. It's beautiful.
No, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And not only that, I got to say, as a Jew, which I keep harping, what I like about this holiday, because
it makes you want to convert.
It makes you want to convert. She said it, not me. One, she said Michal. But not only that, Jewish holidays, and we know this, it all amounts to the same thing on a Jewish holiday. And, we love being Jews, but it's always like, everybody tried to kill us is the narrative, right? Then our God saved us and killed them. Let's eat.
Let's eat.
That's the Jewish holiday.
I'm fine with.
And that's fine. That's fine.
We don't have a big bearded, white, big jolly old good-looking guy.
I know, but everything has to do with alcohol and Christmas, which I love. But speaking of Jewish holidays and funny jokes, it's the time to move to the other blonde chick in the studio.
Who's also Jewish.
Who's also Jewish, exactly.
In case you were wondering.
Psych, no shiksa here. That said, yes.
Right, so that was actually a great note to end on sports, because we're going to talk about comedy and humor, which is great on Christmas Eve.
Yes.
So if anyone forgot what a joke is, I like to start with the essence. So a joke is something spoken, written, or done with humorous intentions, and they have different forms. It can be a word, it can be a gesture. I'm not going to try it out here.
That's the dictionary definition of
Webster.
joke.
Dictionary definition, Webster.
Because I always thought it would, under joke would be my life, but yeah.
See, that's a punch.
That's a
See,
punch.
you did it for me. And now one of the reactions I really like for jokes is laughter.
Yeah.
And if you're wondering what laughter is, well, it's a physical reaction, usually based here in our diaphragm, like that ho, ho, ho. See, it brings us back to Christmas.
Sorry, yeah.
And that, for instance, was another great
that was
way to
another
show
example.
you're doing great
I'm
today.
doing great.
All right, so all this is bringing me to our topic of the day, which is comedy for change.
Oh.
Yes. Comedy isn't usually what you think about when you think about, let's say, peace, right? If you think about peace, it's usually dialogue, reconciliation, negotiation.
But maybe it needs to be infused with a little bit of comedy.
Right, we don't think about comedy or sex, and these could both possibly be solutions to our conflict. Yes, now...
Stop, Michal. I do think that for the Middle East peace process, all that is needed is sex, is essentially what we just said.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And so I attended 2 days ago this incredible conference called Comedy for Change, which is trying to influence and make a difference through comedy. Basically, it was held in Jerusalem, and it came to make a really important point. Anything politicians do, comedians can do better.
I tend to completely agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, jokes aside, it's really using humor to talk about very serious issues. And I think I've said enough. So we're going to take a look. An Israeli Jew, an Egyptian, a Palestinian, mediated by a German. And this is not a joke. Let's take a look at our first segment.
Lior, tell me, in your view, who started this?
The Germans.
Oh, thank you.
No, seriously, the Germans. It's the Holocaust. It's the European Jews Holocaust who led to the Nakba, to the Palestinian disaster.
No, we started. We killed Jesus.
That's true.
Maybe the Egyptians started it. We were doing good. We were building pyramids, and then you left. We ran after you, and we didn't get to catch you before you crossed the Red Sea, unfortunately.
It was the last time we ever built something for you guys.
So what I'm talking, again, sexual jihad, I want the Arabs and the Jews to start having sex. Coming together both figuratively and literally, really. I mean, we could actually start after this. Again, what kind of a scientist am I to not want to kind of test it out on myself?
We've been living together for almost 50 years now, like a couple in a very, very, very bad marriage. And over the years, we've started to look like each other. We Jews became violent, fanatic, religious, and you guys became greedy. You want it all.
Okay, first of all, I did nothing to say.
This panel blew me away.
Yeah.
And it was the first time they worked together, and hopefully they'll continue, maybe worldwide.
Yeah.
They like to offend all religions equally, which is really nice. And we had a chance to talk to the Egyptian comedian, which is based in Denmark, Omar Marzouk, and he grew up in Denmark, so he was able to really make fun of Islam as a career, but he's actually going to go to Egypt to tour, and that'll be interesting. And if he makes it out alive, we can maybe have him here. It was
the things he's going to say. No,
it was really interesting.
And we have him on. We have a bit of him.
No, actually, we have a bit of him, but I think we're running out of time. And so, what I would like to leave you with on this Christmas Eve is a teaser for two people who will be here at your show on Friday.
Oh,
and I'm not going to give it away, so let's take a look.
Let's take a look at funny
people. A little teaser. Funny people,
there you
Christmas Eve.
Oh, Yiddish is kind of a dying language. Who's your audience?
Dying people.
Humor offend anyone?
Everyone, we hope. No, we think all religions are equally hilarious.
Yes.
And ridiculous.
We don't discriminate when it comes to making fun of religion.
I'd say Ellie's my biggest fan.
I'm huge on this guy, honestly.
I think he's great. No, hang on, give me a second. He's normally the thinker of the duo.
Just be pretty.
that's my job.
Yeah, no, I love people who actually say I think all religions are equally offensive. Yeah,
Exactly.
They should be offended equally or equally offensive. Micah, I got to tell you know what? You're the most pleasant person in the studio because every time I turn to you, you're like, yeah, whatever she said.
Thank you.
Have another one. There you go. Yes, no. This was
One's enough for me.
one's enough for you. Are you sure? And I want to ask you, this was held this week, right? You just
This
came
week
back.
in Jerusalem, 2 days, very talented people, and hopefully the collaboration we saw is something new because I think comedy is a tool that can really bring change if people can lighten up and laugh at themselves.
And laugh at themselves, and I think, comedy is actually something that would help every politician in this region. Every single politician, that's the one thing that people are lacking here is the ability to laugh on themselves rather than fighting whose God is bigger. But,
God, right.
Yeah, God, whose God is bigger is
bigger.
essentially what it boils down to. I just want to say, have another one. This was it for us.
So lucky.
I know
There's a charm.
You didn't want one. That was it for us, folks. Don't forget to check us out on the web, Twitter, Facebook, all those social networks. Also, do not forget to check us on tomorrow morning, which will be Christmas Day. It'll be lovely. We'll have many more of these. And that was your morning edition for today. Have a lovely Christmas if you're celebrating it. That's it. I'll shut up.